Welcome to Omega. You're new here, aren't you? I can always tell. Allow me to... Oh, hello, Mocklin. I was just...
Leave, Fargate. Now.
Oh, of course, Mocklin. Whatever she wants.
Blasted scavengers. Welcome to Omega, Shepard.
You know who I am?
Of course. We had you tagged the moment you entered the Terminus systems. You're not as subtle as you think. Arya wants to know what brings a dead Spectre to Omega. I suggest you go to Afterlife now and present yourself.
Cut the attitude. I'm not here to cause problems for Omega.
Things explode around you, Shepard. You can't blame Arya for keeping an eye on you. Afterlife, now.
Hello everybody, in this video we want to explore all that we know about Omega from both mentions within BioWare's official canon and some of our own speculation. There are some minor spoilers ahead, so just watch out for that if you haven't played the games. Omega is a really cool location and we don't want to sort of ruin your initial reaction to it, so definitely play through the Mass Effect series if you haven't already.
Yep.
Yep.
So Omega is built into the mined-out husk of a metallic asteroid. It's known to be a haven for criminals, terrorists, and malcontents for thousands of years. At times, the station has laid idle and abandoned for centuries, but only to be reactivated by a new group of outlaws seeking a fresh start. The space station's original elegant design has given way to haphazard expansion by scrabbling factions of every species. And there is no central government or unifying authority on Omega, and nobody can recall a time there ever was one.
Yep, so just some general stats for Omega, like we've done for some of our previous locations. The population is 7.8 million. The orbital distance is 2.43 astronomical units, so pretty far compared to some of the other places we've talked about, I think, so far. The orbital period is 6.9 Earth years, funny number. And I guess so this basically just means that it takes a lot longer to go around in its sort of orbital distance from the sun. And the total length of Omega is 44.7 kilometers, so it's I guess fairly small, I suppose, compared to some of the massive planets you get to explore. So this is definitely, obviously, a space station rather than an entire planet, but don't let it sort of fool you. This area is still really cool to explore.
Absolutely. So it was originally an asteroid rich in element 0, which obviously is one of the most important elements known in the Mass Effect lore. Omega was briefly mined by the Protheans, who eventually abandoned it due to its thick, impenetrable crust. Thousands of years later, however, nature did what even the Protheans could not. A collision with another asteroid broke Omega in half, exposing its trove of element 0 for easy mining.
So obviously after exposing the element 0, a massive rush ensued as all the corporations and private individuals tried to strike it rich on Omega and sort of mine element 0. And also thieves and outlaws followed in its wake, as obviously all this money flowing around the asteroid is a really good opportunity for them. And as space became tight, construction of the processing facilities extended vertically from the asteroid, creating Omega's sort of jellyfish-like silhouette. So, rather than making a super expansive, flattened mining operation, they kind of just haphazardly expanded upwards.
Or downwards, but yeah.
Or downwards, yeah. So to prevent any further collisions, the station is ringed with an enormous Mass Effect field generators that redirect incoming debris. So it's a proper space station at this point. It's no longer able to be sort of damaged by just random space debris.
Yep, so today Omega is a major hub of narcotics, weapons, and ESO trafficking, so that's element 0 trafficking, without even a pretense of civilian government or military control. Only mercenary groups have been able to instill a limited order, and the most ruthless is an Asari syndicate run by the notorious Arya T'Loak, and check out our other video specifically on Arya. Just as an aside, we were talking about the fact that it started as a rush for ESO. There's a lot of aspects, it's a bit of speculation here, but there's obviously a lot of aspects of the old gold rush in kind of spaghetti western era, United States, and I bet there's a lot of influences there. The idea that these criminals and mercenaries and outlaws come to try and strike it rich seems to me like a very western idea, as in Wild Western. Do you think that's a kind of analogy that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely, and I think especially when you compare it to the Citadel as the sort of counterpart to Omega, it's kind of like the Citadel is more like civilization, and the Omega is like that sort of a Western, like more wild, much more controlled by like who's more powerful rather than who has a higher political position, basically.
Right. So in Wild Western era,
Yeah, exactly.
US, you had the Northeast, the New England, Washington DC, New York like era or area that was seen as like prim and proper and posh society, and then you had the Wild West, which was left to kind of do its own thing more often than not, at least in some of the romanticized versions of the stories, I guess.
Yeah.
So give us some history on Omega if you can.
Yep. So onto the brief history. It's described as the Terminus system's sort of dark, twisted counterpart to the Citadel, as we said. And it is a huge mining station built from the remains of the massive, irregularly shaped asteroid. And obviously it has twisted streets populated with homes, shops, and warehouses. And I think warehouses are obviously the most interesting of the things because there are a few locations that sort of require you to enter some, but also obviously that's just based on the history of how it used to be sort of a mining station. Omega's inhabitants are usually lawless, and the territory is controlled by the strongest faction in the area and frequently changes hands. Often after brutal violence, but the station's current de facto ruler is Arya T'Loak, as we said, a very powerful matriarch who we talk about in another video, so check that one out. And as of 2185, Omega has a population of 7.8 million people, composed of various different species. The station's major export, obviously, is Element Zero.
Yeah, I think it was Element Zero. I think probably less so these days because it's been mined out, but definitely like anything that's contraband essentially passes through Omega. The earliest known ruler of Omega was a Turian. He controlled the station until he was killed by a Krogan crime lord who ate his heart and wore his skull on his armor, which sounds like a nice guy. The Krogan reigned over Omega undisputed for a time until around the 1980s Common Era. When Arya T'Loak, once one of his most trusted lieutenants, which is the English pronunciation, or lieutenants for all of you heathens out there, defeated him in a single combat and usurped him. And again, more on that in the Arya video in terms of some of the what we know about how that happened. The heavy metal-rich core of the original asteroid was mined until the asteroid was almost completely hollow, providing the initial resources used to construct Omega's buildings and facilities. However, over the years, these have been expanded until they completely cover every exposed inch of its surface, making Omega a bizarre mishmash of architecture and technology. The station is, as mentioned before, home to dozens of species, including Batarians, Vorcha, and Listheni Salarians. Don't ask me what they are, as well as many other species not welcome in Citadel space.
Yep, so while some humans refer to it as Omega, the Asari name for it actually translates to the heart of evil, and the Solarian name is the place of secrets, the Turian name is the world without law, and the Krogan name is the land of opportunity, which reflects each culture's attitude towards the society of Omega and just the general opportunities or lack thereof on Omega. So definitely quite interesting.
So that translation came specifically out of Mass Effect Ascension, the novel, which will talk about the mentions of Omega in there. So again, having I guess just recently read it as well, I'm quite well placed to talk about it. And a lot of the storyline of this book happens within Omega, or at least the sort of central points, like the middle part of the story. So basically, it's the first time we ever see it because the book came out before Mass Effect 2 comes out. So I don't think it was even mentioned in-game in the first game. Terminus systems were mentioned, but I don't think Omega was. But obviously in Mass Effect 2, it's also quite a big storyline aspect. So the book came out to really introduce us to that world. Arya is not mentioned at all in the book, or maybe very, very briefly, if at all, and I don't think by name. I didn't see it. But basically it's described as a station that has been built jutting out from a long mined out asteroid, has had arms and everything else added to it over time, giving it a completely random appearance, as we've sort of discussed. But the part that we didn't really discuss was it was talking very much about how the streets of Omega have kind of buildings, mostly at random, winding streets that sometimes even come to a dead end, and even locals can get frustrated and lost and having to turn back around, which is kind of interesting. So there's no real rhyme or reason of how it's happened. It's just been added to randomly over time. There is no police or ruling force except for the rule of force, and obviously being a very alien place by the time this book is, obviously 20 odd years of humans being out in the world, so there's still seen as a very alien place. And in fact, the intro to it was when we were on a chapter from kind of the perspective of Pell, who's a Cerberus operative, or at least at the start of the book he is, spoiler alert. He kind of notices as he's walking down the streets that not many of these other aliens use their translators properly, their personal translators, so all you can hear is like alien sounds and whistles and grunts and everything. And whilst he goes for a meeting to meet with this exiled Quarian named Golo, who is pretty dodgy, they're in this kind of dodgy bar, and he notices that the human bartender comes over with like drinks without having actually ordered any, and puts them down, and he notices a tag on her ankle which is like a slave tag basically, so that her owner knows where she can be. And obviously slavery is outlawed in council space, but in the terminus systems it's obviously not. So he gets quite angry, but he knows that there's nothing he can do for this person. Him being a Cerberus operative is not very trusting of alien technology or drinks, so he doesn't drink the alcohol, by the way. But basically, Golo then invites, or he then rents a warehouse in Talon territory to conduct some of his operations. And then it's also mentioned that Omega keeps a day-night cycle in terms of sort of timing. So there's no mention of whether there's a like night light or daylight sort of set up in the station, but it's definitely in terms of timings they keep galactic standard time, and there are times when the residents, it's considered to be nighttime, but I don't know whether that means it was darker or not. I'm sure it doesn't.
Yeah, so again, just an interesting insight into Omega even before our first adventures there in Mass Effect 2, and again here in Mass Effect Redemption, we have the story from Liara's perspective, I believe. She hitches a ride to Omega on a Batarian freighter in order to meet an informant with the news of the then missing Commander Shepard. Liara then learns from Arya that Shepard's body is being taken to the station's lowest levels at an old mining processing plant. As part of the transaction between the Blue Suns and the Shadow Broker, a brief scuffle at the area ensues over possession of Shepard's body, resulting in explosions, moderate fire damage, and a lot of mercenary casualties. But obviously, as we know, Liara eventually is able to get the body to Cerberus for the start of Mass Effect 2.
Absolutely. So then in Mass Effect 2, we first come to Omega right near the start of the game with two of the first dossiers, which is to recruit a Solarian doctor called Mordin Solus, who it's basically believed that will be able to develop a cure for the Seeker swarms that the collectors are using on their abducting of colonists. Archangel as well, who's like what was the term, like a vigilante kind of justice, who's got that has drawn the ire of basically every single merc in the terminus systems at this point. And then also with DLC potentially Zaid Masani as well.
Yeah, so at this time, there's sort of a plague ravaging Omega's populace, killing dozens of people from various races, but it's mysteriously not harming humans. And this is why Mordin Solus, who's the Solarian scientist that you just talked about, and a former STG operative, which we'll probably talk about in another video.
Yep.
He runs a clinic in Omega's slums, and the plague is eventually revealed to be caused by the Vorcha, who aligned with the Collectors in order to take over the station. But Mordin was obviously sort of searching for a cure and helping people out. And it's a really, really good introduction to Mordin's character, as he sort of looks like a frail, doctor character, but you see he's surviving in Omega, some of the harshest conditions in Omega. And even kind of destroying people with his sort of, violent tendencies as well.
Yes, and more on Mordin in another video as well.
For sure. Up soon. But also elsewhere on the station, we have Archangel, who, as you said, is a vigilante who has been cornered at his little base by Omega's three dominant mercenary factions, which are the Blue Suns, the Eclipse, and the Blood Pack. Shepard signs on with the Blue Suns and eventually helps besiege Archangel, but obviously his intention is actually to recruit and save Archangel. and after taking a Blue Sun's advanced force by surprise and discovering Archangel is, spoiler alert, actually Garrus Vicarian from the first game, Shepard and Garrus fight off the last waves of the Merc attack and eventually escape. So again, just showing that Garrus is an absolute beast of a character and is basically making an enemy of everybody on Omega because he can, because he feels like it. So pretty cool, and you'll find out why he's sort of doing this during the game, but we'll probably also talk about it in a video on Garrus specifically.
Correct. Yeah. So one other, I guess a couple of other things that come up in Mass Effect 2, which we'll probably talk about more as well, is so Samara's loyalty mission also ends up taking place on Omega. Samara, we've got another video on as well, is a Justicar Asari that you recruit during the course of Mass Effect 2, and she's on the hunt for an Ardat Yakshi, which comes up in the very same video. So we'll talk more about specifically that mission, but that's another, I guess, exposure to Omega during the game. And also, whilst on Omega, you also get asked by Aria to go and protect the Patriarch, which is the Krogan mentioned before that Aria took over from, so she kept him alive. And we'll talk more about that as well. We've got some theories around what this was all about, but basically he's under a threat of attack, and you basically are tasked with stopping that from happening, basically. So the next mention of Omega comes from Mass Effect Retribution, which is the book after Ascension. And in Retribution, so I'm currently reading it at the moment, so it's probably going to be spoiler alert for myself, but that's fine. In 2186, Paul Grayson lives on Omega and works for Aria T'Loak as an enforcer under the alias Paul Johnson, which sounds like a great alias using the same first name. Grayson gradually gains Aria's trust through the efforts of her daughter Lyselle, who has become Grayson's lover. Grayson, Lyselle, and more of Aria's enforcers ambush a group of Turians belonging to the growing Talons mercenary group and take the red sand, which Talons had been smuggling on the side. Much later in the game, come back to Omega, basically that Grayson had been implanted with Reaper Tech after Kai Lang's team had basically ambushed him in his apartment and had killed Lyselle. In that ambush, basically Grayson comes back to Omega to meet with Kylie Sanders, which turns out to be a trap set by the elusive man and permitted by Aria, who thinks that Grayson killed Lyselle and wants revenge. Now, Grayson is wounded in the attack but manages to escape Omega.
Yep, so directly following this in Mass Effect Invasion, Omega comes under attack by Reaper creatures called adjutants, which break loose from Cerberus's research facilities and bases beyond the Omega-4 relay and invade the station, obviously, as I said. A Cerberus fleet led by General Oleg Petrovsky and Colonel Raymond Ash arrives and help eliminate all of the adjutants, but the attack turns out to be only a prelude to an attempt by Cerberus to conquer the station and secure exclusive access to the Omega-4 relay by using Omega as kind of like a sort of forward base close to it, but Aria ends up uniting Omega's warring gangs to fight against the Cerberus occupation force, but General Petrovsky outsmarts her by taking the entire station hostage and threatening to destroy it level by level, and Aria eventually surrenders and accepts exile. Cerberus then proceeds to take control of Omega, furthering the elusive man's plans to counter the Reapers. So this sort of sets up the start of Mass Effect 3 as well, for the sort of state of how the station is looking.
Yep, and so now you get in Mass Effect 3, you've got the DLC option of the Omega DLC, a fantastic DLC by all accounts, I think. So basically, long story short, like Aria recruits Shepard to basically help her take back Omega, and essentially the idea is, so obviously Cerberus would then have overused the mining facilities of Omega and pushed the mining equipment of the asteroid to its limits, so it had difficulties maintaining the occupation of Omega. The Talons gang is still around, and it's led by Nyreen Kandros, who's a female Turian, the first one we meet, basically in all works pretty much, and she's pretty cool as well. And she's one of the groups that are still able to resist the occupation. So in order to contain the civilian population, Oleg Petrovsky erected large energy-intensive force fields throughout the station, along with a number of mechs and troops to maintain order.
So Cerberus also, whilst here, conducted experiments with the Reaper-based adjutants in Omega, and initially these tests proved to be a pretty big disaster. Large sections of Omega had to be shut down and sealed at a great cost to the lives of Omega, just to contain the outbreaks of these uncontrollable adjutants. But further experimentation would eventually give Cerberus full control of the rest of these creatures, which obviously sort of secured their power on Omega even more. But eventually, Aria begins her campaign to liberate Omega from Cerberus, having enlisted Shepard in the process. So obviously this is taking place during the Omega DLC, so of course Shepard is involved now. So traveling aboard a captured Cerberus cruiser in order to infiltrate the Cerberus fleet surrounding the station, Aria opens her attack with a crippling blow to the fleet's flagship. Her own fleet charges in via the mass relay and sort of begins like a space battle outside of Omega. But the tables are soon turned as Petrovsky reveals Omega's upgraded defenses and starts inflicting heavy damage on her fleet.
So the initial invasion force lands on the station in escape pods. Aria and Shepard first disable Omega's defenses in order to give the invading fleet a chance, and later with the help of Nyreen they fight their way to Aria's bunker on Omega's D deck, where Aria decides that in order to get to Petrovsky's command center in Afterlife, she needs to rally the Talon's gang to her cause to supplement her ground forces and disable the force fields that Cerberus has set up. Cerberus is siphoning power for the force fields from one of Omega's main reactions deep within its mines. As access to it is mostly cut off by the force fields, Aria devises a plan to go through a powered-down EZO processing plant. Navigating the mines, Aria notices the machinery's overworked condition and estimates a month before they give out if the current trend continues.
Yep, so Aria and the company eventually reach an elevator to the reactor's back door, and although General Petrovsky traps the squad in more force fields in anticipation of their move, Aria is not to be outdone here and forcibly opens a hole in the barrier for Shepard to pass through and disable the reactor. So I guess this is sort of one of the primary showings of Aria's biotic abilities, as she sort of fully opens a hole in a force field just so that Shepard can go through. Petrovsky dishes out another difficult dilemma at the turn of events, immediately shutting down the reactor, which will cause a huge loss of life on a lot of Omega's areas, which translates to basically just a loss of civilian lives specifically, which is a huge deal for Shepard and I guess for Aria as well, because she does care about the people on Omega. So taking the time to reroute the power increases the chance of Aria and Nyreen dying, as they're still holding inside the trap that Petrovsky created for them. But regardless of the choice, Shepard disables the reactor and ends the forced internal blockades.
Yeah, and so with the Talons then recruited, the populace incited, and the force fields down, the true war for Omega begins as the civilians revolt against Cerberus. Aria and Shepard prevent Cerberus from destroying Omega by blowing up the station's central support column, then join in the offensive to Afterlife from the Gozu district, which we also vaguely see in one of the I can't remember which one it was, but one of the missions in Mass Effect 2 as well. Nyreen, who had been leading a separate assault with her Talons, sacrifices herself to kill a group of rogue adjutants. Enraged at Nyreen's loss, Aria charges into Afterlife ahead of Shepard.
Yep, so at this point Afterlife has been completely repurposed by Petrovsky, in course making it into his base of operations. The General traps Aria inside of a stasis field at the center of the establishment, powered by generators positioned at the corners. Shepard breaks her out and defeats all the Cerberus forces in Afterlife, so obviously Shepard is a beast.
He is. Defeated, Petrovsky surrenders himself and orders his troops to stand down, but Aria and Shepard decide whether he should be spared or executed on the spot. With Omega hers to rule once more, Aria announces its liberation to the citizenry and vows to never lose the station again.
Yep, so obviously this is quite a long DLC in Mass Effect 3, and probably the longest you'll spend in Omega at one time in a game, but definitely you get to see pretty much all of what it has to offer in terms of, you go from all the way at the bottom with the sort of the old mining areas, and you sort of go through some of the districts all the way up back to sort of Afterlife and the areas you've been before, so definitely a fantastic DLC, definitely play it if you haven't.
100%.
But I guess sort of near the end, before we talk about some of our own thoughts on it, I guess we just want to go through some of the districts?
Yeah, so we can talk about some of the districts that are there. So it's a bit of alphabetical order, really, but we've got the Card district, which is a district controlled by the El Corps. An ongoing war between Volus and Batarians in a neighbouring district in 2183 forced merchants and customers alike to move their business over to the relative stability of this district.
Yep, so we have the Dor district as well, which is located near several vital Omega utility systems, including a water treatment facility and the main ventilation system, and also the station's central support column. Cerberus fortified this area during their occupation in 2186, as we talked about.
Yep. Then you have the Fumi district, which is a district the Talons raided to free civilians during the Cerberus occupation of Omega in 2186.
Yep, and again, as we said, the Gozu district, which is a residential area in the lower levels of Omega, accessible by shuttle, and it's notable for being the location of the Omega Clinic. Once,
there you go.
Yeah, so there you go. The clinic that Modern was at. It was once policed by the Blue Suns, but the district fell into chaos after being quarantined to prevent the spread of the unknown plague in 2185, which obviously Modern is combating in Mass Effect 2.
Yeah, and then you have the Kenzo district, which is a district where Garm and the Blood Pack were allegedly carrying out a large gun-running operation in 2185, which turned out to be a ruse set up by Sidonis for Archangel so that Omega's gangs could attack Archangel's hideout. So that's obviously where you've also gone in Mass Effect 2.
Yep, so we also have the Kima district, which is another residential area that borders the Gozu district from before. The vigilante Archangel and his team occupied a building in the Kima district in 2185 where they were cornered by the Blue Suns, Eclipse, and the Blood Pack. So this, I believe, is only mentioned in Mass Effect 2 as where Archangel or Garrus was betrayed in the first place. I think maybe you come back here for his loyalty mission to get revenge, but I can't remember.
No, his loyalty mission is on the Citadel.
On the Citadel, okay, yeah. So it's just mentioned, I believe.
Yeah. Tuhi District is a commercial area filled with shops and businesses, including Tuhi District Storage that is located near Aria's bunker. Cerberus fortified this area during their occupation in 2186.
Yep, and then finally we have the Zeta District, which is a district where Cerberus deployed the ramp-up mechs during their occupation in 2186. So this was sort of a heavy war zone during the Omega DLC. Absolutely.
So I have a little bit of trivia here. So Omega, which is the 24th and last letter of the Greek alphabet. So obviously when we talk about Alpha and Omega, Alpha being the beginning and Omega being the end, so it's interesting that you have the Omega relay with Omega, and you also have in Mass Effect Galaxy you have the Alpha relay as well, which is kind of interesting.
That is pretty cool. Also, according to the Collector's Edition concept art book, the team based the design on a mushroom cloud for Omega, which is actually really fitting because, you know, obviously like mushroom clouds from nuclear bombs or just bombs in general are often associated with sort of like anarchy and stuff like that, and obviously that's kind of the whole point of Omega, is that it's almost like an anarchy just ruled by whoever's the most powerful, and it's got gang influence and that sort of thing. So pretty interesting that the design is also sort of inspired by what it actually becomes.
Yeah, and then so the overall atmosphere and style is inspired by the film Blade Runner. So there's some similarities, including the electrical interference in signs, flames atop buildings, and poor environmental conditions.
Yep, and that's probably pretty much all we have for like general sort of trivia. There's a few other things here, but I don't think that. No.
So yeah. So most of the trivia that's relevant to lore, I don't want to talk about necessarily trivia for specific like objects that you can get in games.
Yeah.
So we can get into a bit more of our speculation, our thoughts, and our theories. So I guess I wanted to start with a bit of a theory that I think Omega is BioWare's commentary on what can be the end of our society. So things like the loss of our humanity and maybe loss of law, bringing about the ultimate end of what we know. Obviously being called Omega is a bit of a reference to that. So like being the end of the alphabet, but also the idea that it's designed off the shape of a mushroom cloud, which generally is caused by nuclear bombs. Omega is also a term that's quite frequently used with with nuclear bombs and atomic bombs, because it obviously means end. But then I'd add on to that the lawlessness, the depiction of like the shady dealings, red sand, and other drugs being used, the selling and consumption, and the high level of like hedonism. Like obviously the afterlife has a lot of options, even in the books described as having a lot of options for things like prostitutes and dancers and lap dancers and everything, which is generally a very hedonistic lifestyle. So I actually go even further and say that it's probably got some influences from the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Which was also quite ironic in that where one of the verses in there says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land," which kind of is like a biblical reference to like nuclear war, actually. Rain down burning sulfur from the heavens is pretty nuclear to me. So I guess that would be my theory, and maybe coupling into a few other things, that it's pretty much I think it's one of the heights of like the cyberpunk like location and ambience, the whole neon signs, hedonistic lifestyle ruled by corporation or force, and I think also it's generally a bit of a dystopian setting, or a post-apocalyptic setting as cyberpunk, taking like Akira as an example, which is a movie that's really about the threat of nuclear war, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and I think it would be pretty silly not to draw the connection between Omega and the sort of cyberpunk roots that it has, as it's obviously like just because it happens to be in sort of a more sci-fi space like setting doesn't mean that it's not like inspired by cyberpunk settings, and it's definitely like you could have an entire game based entirely on Omega and it would be a cyberpunk game rather than a sci-fi game. So it just so happens that it's a smaller subsection of a bigger game, but it's still definitely cyberpunk inspired.
I mean, the biggest question is when you first come to it in the games, Mass Effect 2, when you first walk into Afterlife, going through that like corridor and then opening the next door and seeing that's cyberpunk 100%.
100%, yeah, absolutely. Another sort of theory that we've sort of talked about in the past, I think, is that Omega is a little bit of a reference to Mos Eisley from the Star Wars universe. Obviously, it's not the same desert-style setting, but it's quite clearly, sort of a lawless, like outlaw haven type of area where crime and just people with the most power and force can sort of rule. So, for instance, the character of Jabba the Hutt, even in Star Wars, is kind of, I guess, a very similar position of power to Arya in Omega. Obviously the connections aren't just that surface level, but I think it is definitely pretty obvious that the two areas are quite similar.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think also there was one direct reference in, I think it might have been in the books, or it may have been like Anderson in the game or something, I'm not sure, but someone from like Alliance or something like that refers to Omega as like a group of, what was the quote from Star Wars, like the same quote that Obi-Wan says? It's pretty much like
the hive of scum and villainy.
Yeah, it's almost word for word the same. I think it was in the book Ascension, and I think it was one of the, I think it was Hendel Mitra. Anyone in the comments that knows more than me, please let me know, but I think it was the same reference. Hendel Mitra basically on the way says something like a hive of scum and villainy, which is kind of, so that's where that comes from. It's definitely their version of, I would say. And then obviously in Andromeda they kind of have another version of, which is more obviously a desert setting, but that's not canon and we're not talking about that here. I'm going to go on to maybe a controversial theory here, or maybe not, depending on who's listening, but the kind of power struggle between Arya and then the Patriarch. I think that this is very much a reference to having like a strong female character basically kick the Patriarchy in the teeth and defang them, so crushing one of his hearts, obviously Krogan having multiple organs, but then keeping him around as an example. So I think that a theory on Krogans is kind of like, there's a lot of theories on Krogans, like some people have said it's like the Russians, like the Klingons, which are basically the Russians anyway, and that's another video, but I also think it's BioWare's kind of dumb male, like toxic masculinity aggression representation in game 2. So to have this Asari, which is like the amazing like female kind of like powerful female, like cultural female, sexual female, being able to like use that to knock the Patriarch down, is a bit of another reference to like the end of the patriarchy. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a more a much more subtle reference, I suppose. Like it didn't sort of force it down players' throats. So I think you're right. I definitely do think this is sort of BioWare's subtle way of having that happen in the game without it being too too forced. But definitely, I definitely think I agree with you in that Krogans are often sort of supposed to be depicted as the dumb sort of male representation in the game, whilst the Asari and specifically in this case Arya is sort of the strong sort of female character that then removes the patriarchy from Omega and makes it into her own.
Yeah, so she named him the Patriarch. It wasn't his name, but interestingly, that an Asari matriarch dethrones a Krogan and then names him the Patriarch. Like, I think that maybe I'm looking too much into it, and it never really occurred to me much, until recently. But it just thought that's probably one of their little ways of saying this, which is fine. And look, I've got one more, I guess, more of a theory and speculation on my part, but a lot of these that we've looked into with the official canon and mentioned in game of what the actual populations of places are just don't strike true for me in a lot of ways, in terms of how the ambience is, in terms of how big it is and what makes sense. So what I mean by that is the population of Omega is set to be 7.8 million. And of course it depends on how big the asteroid is and the station is, but based on what they've described it as, I think that's way too low, personally. Basically these tenements and apartments pumped in, the station being built at random and being this attractor to all these kind of lowlives and everything, and the fact I think that they wouldn't have a census or the real security checks that obviously a Citadel or a regular planet would have, strikes me as maybe 7.8 million is like an official estimate, but actually it's a lot more. So I would theorize that it's probably up to 5 times this amount, to be honest, and then you can't really work out the actual number because obviously, as I said, no checks, no census, because there's no government. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I mean, I reckon that makes a lot of sense. Obviously they have their official number as 7.8 million, but even when we were just reading through the districts that Omega has, there was a decent chunk of them were sort of civilian housing districts. So you wouldn't expect them to put that many in unless there really was quite a hefty population to support. And I don't think 7.8 million in the grand scheme of the galaxy is that huge. So yeah, I think you might be right. I think definitely 7.8 is probably just the official number that they have, but ultimately they can't track all the sort of illegal hidden entries to Omega. All the there's got to be so many people on Omega who have come in sort of under the radar, or been smuggled in, or so many. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely up to 5 times the amount that is actually officially listed.
But that's like I said, that's what I think. And I've just got to say as well, as a final thing, I think this probably, if I'm honest, is probably my number 1 favorite location in all the games. At least it's very close, and we might make a video on that at some point as well. But I really, really love the feel of Omega and the various places that you can go. I think it's a genius. It's a genius location for them to use, and it makes so much sense that something like this would happen as well.
Yeah, I mean, of course, with all the, especially as it's sort of near the terminus systems, it's near the Omega Relay. It's exactly what you would expect from an opposite, an equal and opposite to the Citadel. The Citadel is obviously the lawless land, and here Omega is the direct sort of competitor to that. I think it's really, really cool that you get sort of a different set of species that you see more frequently. So obviously on the Citadel, you see a lot of the Citadel races as the primary citizens there. But on Omega, you will get to see all of the other races that maybe aren't so welcome in other locations. So, you'll see the Batarians and the Vorcha a lot more frequently. And I think that's really, really cool.
And Krogan as well, which aren't frequent on the Citadel.
Yeah, so I agree with you, honestly. I think it's one of the best locations that BioWare have created for the Mass Effect sort of universe. So yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Again, if you haven't played the games yet and you're still watching, definitely get to Omega, enjoy it yourself. and tell us what you think in the comments, because I think with that, that's basically all we have.
That is. See you next time.
You run, Omega?
I am Omega.